That morning had every indication that it would be like any other. The grey sky, the hurried footsteps of parents dropping their children off at the school gates, the occasional honking of horns shattering the silence of the residential neighborhoods. Nothing suggested that in a matter of minutes, the fate of 7 innocent girls would be on the brink of irreversible tragedy. But it was precisely in this seemingly routine scenario that something extraordinary began to happen, and few noticed. On the sidewalk of Jefferson Elementary, among scattered students and hanging backpacks, stood a boy, an 11-year-old black boy, quiet, always forgotten by his classmates, almost invisible to the hurried eyes of adults. His name was Isaiah. And that morning, while everyone was distracted by their own rushes, he saw. He didn't hear rumors. He didn't make up stories. He saw. He saw the driver of the white van pause too long in front of the gate. He saw the man's eyes dart away as the children approached. He saw the driver's left hand tremble as he typed something on a device. But what caught his attention most was the look in his eyes, a look that clashed with the forced smile. It was a look Isaiah had seen before, in nightmares, in headlines, in stories whispered by neighborhood mothers. Without knowing exactly why, he acted. He approached a police officer patrolling the area and said just one thing: "That man is acting strange." What came next changed everything. Sirens, running, muffled screams, and then the revelation. 7 girls trapped, a list with their names, ropes, pills, a kidnapping in progress. But to understand how a disbelieving boy became the link between disaster and salvation, we need to go back. Back to the exact moment Isaiah decided to trust his instincts, even when no one else would, because what he saw saved lives. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. The next Graveyard Tales are even more disturbing. Before he became the name in the newspapers that chaotic morning, Michael Brown was just another kid trying to find his place in the world. He lived in a small apartment in the Decatur, Atlanta, with the mother, Angela, a night nurse who often arrived home after the sun was already high. His father had passed away years before, and although the void he left was felt in every detail of daily life, Michael had learned early on not to wait for broken promises. His routine consisted of waking up alone, packing his own breakfast, and walking to school with the battered backpack he'd inherited from an older cousin. He was a quiet boy, the kind who preferred to observe rather than speak. His classmates found him strange because he rarely laughed at the same jokes and often seemed distant, lost in thought. But there was one quality few noticed. Michael noticed everything. The detail in a teacher's ill-fitting uniform, the way a janitor walked with a constant glance over his shoulder, or even the hidden sadness in a classmate's eyes. This attentive gaze was both a gift and a burden, because it gave him the feeling of seeing what no one else wanted to see. At school, Michael wasn't popular. He was the boy who sat by the window, doodling in notebooks or watching the street scene. Many laughed at his shyness, and some even took advantage of his silence to mock him. Angela, his mother, tried to encourage him every night, saying, "Son, you have eyes that see far. This could take you far one day." But to Michael, these words sounded more like a comfort than a promise. His only refuge lay in the mystery books in the small school library. He loved reading about detectives who followed invisible clues and unlikely heroes who faced evil with unexpected courage. Perhaps it was this quiet passion for detective stories that shaped his analytical eye, training his mind to seek meaning in every fragment of everyday life. And although he wasn't aware of it, that skill was about to place him at the center of a real story, far more terrifying than any book could offer. On the morning of the event, Michael left home as usual, taking slow steps along the neighborhood's cracked sidewalk. The cold wind blew dry leaves along the way, and he distracted himself by kicking some as he imagined what it would be like to one day be recognized not as the quiet boy, but as someone who made a difference. As he crossed the corner near the school, he saw from afar the children, laughing, running, and fighting to be the first to reach the gate. He, as usual, kept his distance, preferring to walk in silence, his eyes alert to every movement around him. This was how he protected himself from the world, observing first, acting later. And it was precisely this way of looking at life that made him realize something everyone else overlooked. Amidst the din of voices and footsteps, there was a detail that didn't fit with the ordinary scene of a school morning. A presence that seemed out of place. And as always, Michael was the only one to notice. The audience, who until then had connected with the boy's fragility and humanity, began to sense that his most striking characteristic, his watchful gaze, was not just a quirk, but an omen. The invisible boy, the one no one could hear, was about to see something that would change the fate of many. Because on that ordinary morning, standing at the school gates, his silent eyes caught the first sign that something terrible was about to happen. As Michael's classmates raced through the school gates, busy laughing and jockeying to see who would get there first, their eyes fixed on something that immediately stood out from the cheerful scene. Across the street, parked in a strategic spot, was Afram Branca. There was no company logo, no visible front license plates, and the driver seemed more interested in the students than anything else. To most, it would have been just another parked car. But to Michael, there was something unsettling about the look in his eyes, hidden behind the fogged glass. The man behind the wheel pretended to be fiddling with his cell phone, but his eyes roamed the children with almost predatory attention. The way his fingers tapped nervously on the steering wheel betrayed anxiety. With each passing group of girls, his posture changed, leaning forward as if waiting for the perfect moment to act. Michael felt a shiver run down his spine, the same kind of chill his mystery. Novels described when the hero discovered danger was closer than he imagined. He paused for a moment, pretending to tie his shoelaces, and took a closer look. The van showed no signs of rust or dirt. It looked too new to have been left there. Inside, besides the driver, there was a suspicious mess. A plastic bottle lying on the floor, an open box on the passenger seat, and something that looked like a coiled rope. None of it made sense in this context, and with each detail he pieced together. Michael felt his heart beat faster, as if he were putting together a puzzle whose final image he didn't want to see. He looked around, trying to see if anyone else noticed what he saw, but everyone was too busy. The teachers chatted among themselves, the students joked, and even the school security guard seemed distracted, looking at his watch. The feeling of being alone in this realization increased his anxiety. Michael knew that if he opened his mouth, they would probably laugh again, as they had so often done when he tried to draw attention to details no one took seriously. Still, something in his instincts compelled him not to look away. He noticed that the driver, upon noticing some girls walking toward the gate unsupervised, discreetly fiddled with the handle, as if ready to open the van door at any moment. Time seemed to slow down in that instant, and Michael was faced with a choice. Ignore it like everyone else, or risk everything by believing what his eyes were telling him. It was at that moment, between doubt and fear, that he noticed an even more disturbing detail. The man wasn't just watching, he was waiting for someone specific. The fixed gaze, the list on the dashboard, the obvious anxiety. There was a plan in motion, and Michael had just become the only barrier between the normalcy of that morning and imminent disaster. The boy took a deep breath, and the weight of the decision began to settle on his mind. Because if what he imagined was real, that driver's next move could change the fate of many families. Michael kept his gaze fixed on the van, every detail becoming clearer as time passed. Pretending to still adjust his shoelaces, he leaned in a little closer and, through the small crack in the side window, was able to see the interior more clearly. What he saw made his stomach churn. On the passenger seat was a roll of thick rope, hastily rolled up as if recently used. Beside it, a spilled pillbox scattered several bottles across the upholstery, and, among them, a crumpled dark cloth stained with something he couldn't identify. It didn't look at all like a father's car waiting for his son, or like someone just parked by chance. It was a space prepared for something that shouldn't be happening. Michael felt his throat dry, and for a moment he considered turning around and running, pretending he hadn't seen anything, like any other boy his age would. But something held him back. The certainty that if he pretended not to see, someone would pay dearly for it. As he watched, he also noticed a sheet of paper on the dashboard. The letters were large, written hastily, and although he couldn't read everything, he could make out what they appeared to be. Female names. A chill ran down his spine, because that list wasn't there by chance. The driver didn't seem to just be waiting randomly. There were targets, there was intent, and it was all right before his eyes. Michael backed away slowly, trying not to attract attention, but his heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo in the street itself. He was no longer just a suspicious boy. Now he had clearly seen evidence that pointed to something terrible about to happen. And in that moment, he realized he couldn't keep it to himself. He needed to speak up, needed to warn someone, even if no one believed him. The problem was that, as so often before, Michael's voice was often unheard. But this time, his insistence would be the only chance to stop that dark plan from coming to fruition. With sweaty palms and a racing heart, Michael walked through the school gates, nearly tripping over his own feet. The scene in the van still throbbed in his mind like a horror movie he couldn't turn off. He knew he needed to tell someone immediately. The first adult he saw was Mrs. Parker, the vice principal, who was organizing the students in the hallway. Michael tugged at the hem of her coat, trying to control his choked voice. "I saw a strange man in front of the school. He's in a white van full of ropes and medicine. He has a list of names," he said in one breath, as if the words might escape him if he took too long. The vice principal looked him up and down with a tired smile, as if she was used to children making up stories to get attention. "Michael, how many times have we been through this? You need to stop imagining things. Go to class before you're late." He tried to insist, gasping for air as if he were drowning. "It's not your imagination. I saw it, I swear." "He's waiting for someone, I'm sure of it." But the words crashed against the wall of disbelief. Mrs. Parker shook her head, adjusted her glasses, and gently nudged him toward the classroom. Michael felt the ground give way beneath his feet. How could anyone ignore something so obvious? In class, things were no different. He approached a teacher, Mr. Henderson, and tried once again to explain. But the teacher just laughed, telling him he should channel his creativity into writing stories, not making up rumors. Some classmates overheard the conversation and began to mock him. They called him a fake detective. Others laughed, imitating police sirens. And within minutes, Michael was the butt of jokes. The weight of humiliation settled on his shoulders, but not enough to drown out the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He remembered the driver's gaze, the anxiety evident in every gesture, and especially that list on the dashboard. This wasn't a figment of his imagination. This was real. Even so, with each rejection, Michael felt as if he were screaming in a closed room with no one to hear him. The voices laughing in the background only increased his anger and loneliness. But unlike many, he didn't consider giving up. If no one believed him, then it was up to him to carry the burden. And it was in that moment of widespread disbelief that a decision began to grow within him like an insistent flame. If the adults would do nothing, he himself would seek. The truth. Michael, the silent boy, the ignored boy, would prove himself right. What he didn't know yet was that this decision would put him on a dangerous path, where every step could be his last. After being ignored by the vice principal, ridiculed by the teacher, and made a laughingstock by his classmates, Michael sat in the back row of the classroom, staring blankly out the window. The sound of laughter still echoed around him, but he was deaf to everything. What mattered was the image that wouldn't leave his mind. The inside of that van, the ropes, the vials, the list. It was impossible to go on with the day as if nothing had happened. With each passing minute, the sense of urgency only grew. When the bell rang for recess, Michael took advantage of the students' confusion in the hallway and slipped silently into the courtyard. The distance between him and the street wasn't great, and from there he could see the van parked in the same spot. The driver remained there, motionless. But the nervousness in his movements was visible even from a distance. Michael took a deep breath, reached into his backpack, and pulled out his mother's old cell phone, which she had lent him so he could call in an emergency. "If no one believes me, I'll prove it myself," he muttered, almost as if vowing courage to himself. He approached slowly, pretending to kick a forgotten ball on the lawn while holding his cell phone hidden between his fingers. With discreet movements, he began recording. The camera shook along with his hands, but it captured every detail. The man anxiously fiddling with the dashboard, the girls distractedly passing in front of the gate, and the moment he opened the door just a few inches, as if testing the right moment to act. Michael swallowed hard, feeling sweat trickle down his forehead, but he didn't stop filming. At one point, he noticed something even more disturbing. The driver took an envelope from his pocket and opened it, revealing a piece of paper. Michael stepped forward to get a better look, and for a brief moment he could make out what was written. It was indeed a list of names. 7 of them, all female, carefully marked with a red line. The air seemed to leave his lungs. There was no longer any room for doubt. He backed away, put away his phone, and ran back into the school, trying not to attract attention. His heart was pounding like a jagged drum, but at the same time, there was a strange clarity in his mind. Now, he had proof. The E. Problem was both simple and devastating. How would he get someone to believe him before it was too late? For the next few hours, Michael maintained his covert demeanor. He participated in class, but always with his eyes turned outward, as if every shadow might hide a threat. When a classmate asked him why he was so quiet, he simply shrugged. He couldn't risk revealing anything to anyone who would laugh again. This was his secret, his mission, and there was no turning back. That afternoon, as the students were leaving, the suspense intensified. The van remained in the same spot, like a predator patiently waiting for its moment to strike. Michael felt his entire body tremble, but his eyes didn't waver. He knew he needed to stay alert, record more, piece it all together. It was too risky, but at the same time impossible to ignore. It was then that he saw something that chilled his blood. The driver, with a quick gesture, signaled to 2 girls walking alone on the sidewalk. He waved. Discreetly, as if trying to get their attention without arousing suspicion. Michael almost screamed, but he suppressed the urge and pulled out his phone again, recording the entire thing. Time seemed suspended, and each second felt like an eternity. The boy breathed deeply, his heart beating faster than he could keep up. He knew he was crossing a dangerous line, a line that could put him at risk, but there was no other option. If it weren't for him, no one could stop what was about to happen. And it was precisely at this point that something even more disturbing appeared before his eyes, something that would make the danger real and immediate, putting his life at inescapable risk. Back in the empty school hallway, Michael leaned against the cold wall, trying to catch his breath. The phone in his hands trembled, as if it held not just images, but the weight of a truth that could change everything. He knew he had to look at what he had recorded, even if it confirmed the worst fears. Swirling in his mind, with the headphones fitting poorly, he played the video. The images were shaky but revealing. The driver, clearly nervous, waved to two girls. The dashboard showed the paper with names crossed out. And in the background, the sound of children's laughter contrasted cruelly with the tension of the scene. Every detail fit together like pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to put together. Michael paused the video just as the camera captured the list on the dashboard. Straining. His eyes, he managed to decipher a few names. To his dismay, they belonged to girls from his own school. He recognized two classmates, and the shock made him clutch his phone to his chest as if to protect their lives. The air grew heavy, difficult to breathe, as if the discovery had stripped him of his remaining innocence. The boy then began to recall old stories he'd heard on the city news, unexplained disappearances, unsolved cold cases, faces plastered on wanted posters. He'd never paid much attention to these reports, but now everything seemed connected. What if this driver was connected to something much bigger than just a single attempt? What if the list was part of an organized network, using the school routine itself as a cover? Michael's mind raced in circles, but a certainty grew. He was facing something real, something monstrous. And yet, no one believed him. The weight of this loneliness crushed him, but it also gave him a silent determination. He couldn't stop. He needed to gather more evidence, find a way to prevent the worst. That's when a detail in the video caught his attention even more. Behind the driver, taped to the side of the door, was a badge. It wasn't a school badge, but something resembling a contractor's identification. The name was blurred, but the logo looked familiar. Michael remembered seeing men in similar uniforms near the school a few weeks earlier, repairing the electrical grid. Could this driver be posing as one of those workers? The revelation made everything even more ominous. The man wasn't just waiting, he was camouflaging himself, pretending to be part of the environment so as not to arouse suspicion. And as Michael absorbed this, he felt a wave of fear course through him. If he could spot these details, it wouldn't be long before the driver realized he was being watched too. The sense of imminent danger hung over him like a heavy cloud. With every step down the hallway, Michael wondered how long he would have before he was discovered, because somehow he knew the man wouldn't let it slide if he realized someone had caught wind of his plan. And it was precisely this intuition that began to be confirmed when, upon stepping out into the courtyard again, Michael met the driver's gaze, a direct, penetrating gaze that seemed to span the distance between the street and the school gates. It was no longer the observation of a hidden predator. It was the certainty that now he too was being watched. The boy recoiled, swallowing hard. The game had changed. He was no longer just a curious spectator. He had just become part of the scene and, worse, part of the target. The glance that crossed the street wasn't random. The driver, until then hidden behind the guise of a distracted man, now fixed his eyes directly on Michael, as if he'd noticed every movement, every recording, every detail the boy dared to record. The air seemed thicker, and the world around him, the children's voices, the sound of passing cars, the distant jingle of the school bell, vanished into a suffocating silence. Only that cold gaze remained, carrying the silent threat of someone with much to lose if discovered. Michael instinctively backed away, his legs trembling. His heart was beating so fast it seemed to announce his presence. He tried to hide it, looking away and pretending to tie his shoe, but he knew it was too late. The driver had already marked him. The van gave a slight jolt, as if it were about to start. And the boy felt his instinct scream inside him, "Run!" He turned and walked through the school hallways, trying to appear calm. But each footstep echoed like a drum in the void. Fear clung to his skin, and every shadow seemed to hide imminent danger. Behind him, the sound of a door slamming echoed, and even without looking, Michael knew he was being followed. In his haste, he entered the library, where the dim light of the tall bookshelves offered refuge. The smell of aged paper and polished wood enveloped him, but the comfort that space once brought was gone. He hid between two bookshelves and pulled out his phone, checking to see if it was still recording. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the device. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. They weren't the footsteps of a child running to play. They were slow, steady, calculated. Michael held his breath, the sound of his heart seeming louder than anything around him. The driver was inside the school. Somehow, he had managed to get through the entrance without arousing suspicion. The tension was unbearable. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find courage. He knew that if he were caught, no one would believe his story. The man could easily turn him into just another lost boy, missing without explanation. The thought made him tremble even more, but it also brought a spark of determination. He couldn't give up now. The footsteps approached. Michael crouched low and crept between the shelves, each movement calculated, each breath held. The sound of his shoes scraping against the floor seemed to haunt him, and for a moment he felt as if a larger shadow had fallen over his own. When he looked up, he saw the man's silhouette reflected in the glass of the library's exit door. The driver was too close. Gathering what little courage he had, Michael stood up and ran for the side door. The sudden noise caught the man's attention, who whipped his head around and charged after him. The boy dashed through the hallways, dodging chairs and nearly slipping on the polished floor, while behind him he heard the heavy breathing of his pursuer. The fear was overwhelming, but within him a certainty also grew. If there was any chance of escape, it lay in reaching someone who could see the video, someone who couldn't ignore it. He needed to find help before it was too late. And it was at that exact moment, as he reached the courtyard bathed in the afternoon sun, that Michael saw two police officers on the street corner talking near the security booth. Their eyes shone with hope, but the distance still seemed immense, and the driver was getting closer and closer. The next step could define whether the truth would finally come to light or whether silence would fall over everything, burying not only the evidence, but also the boy who dared to see what no one else could. Michael ran across the courtyard as if each step were his last. His breathing was heavy, his chest burning. But his eyes were fixed on the two police officers on the corner. The driver sped behind him, and for a moment the boy felt he would never make it in time. Still, he didn't stop. His survival instinct drove him, and with it, the conviction that he needed to save those girls, whose names were on that list. When he reached the fence, he shouted at the top of his voice, "Police! He's there! He has a list!" The officers turned immediately. The boy, panting and with tears in his eyes, held out his trembling cell phone. One of the officers took the device and with a suspicious look began watching the video. It took only a few seconds for the skeptical expression to turn serious. The driver appeared in close-up, waving to the girls, the list on the dashboard, and the nervous gestures that betrayed his intentions. Meanwhile, the other officer glanced down the street and noticed the van still parked. The driver, realizing he had lost control, tried to start the vehicle, but officers acted quickly. Within seconds, they radioed for backup. The apparent tranquility of the school morning was shattered by a burst of sirens echoing everywhere. Michael, still breathless, watched with wide eyes. For the first time, someone believed him. But along with that relief came a strange feeling. The worst was yet to come. That video might have been enough to convince the police, but it didn't mean the children were safe. The driver had a plan, and plans like that don't usually end easily. The boy clenched his fists, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. What would happen in the next few minutes would determine not only the future of the 7 girls, but also whether he himself would emerge from this story alive. Sirens began to echo like thunder ripping through the sky before a storm. Police cars appeared on corners, blocking every exit on the street in front of the school. The white van, previously discreet and camouflaged in everyday life, was now the center of attention. The driver, realizing he was surrounded, desperately turned the ignition key, trying to escape the trap closing around him. The engine's roar faltered, but soon gained strength, and the tension spread like electricity in the air. Michael watched from the sidewalk, protected by one of the officers, as everything seemed to happen in slow motion before his eyes. The vehicle advanced a few meters, but was blocked by 2 patrol cars that slid across the asphalt with screeching tires. The driver slammed, his hands on the steering wheel in fury, and his distorted expression left no doubt he was willing to risk everything. A megaphone blared, ordering him to get out with his hands up. But instead, the man pulled something from the back seat, and for a moment, everyone's hearts stopped. It wasn't a firearm, but a dark cloth with which he tried to cover his face, perhaps to disguise himself amid the commotion. Still, the gesture was enough to heighten the tension, and the officers advanced with their weapons raised. It was at that moment that the side door of the van burst open. 7 girls, terrified and tearful, were huddled inside. Some screamed, others stood motionless in shock, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. The sight was devastating, living proof that the plan was real, that Michael had seen what everyone else chose to ignore. The scene became chaotic. Police officers rushed toward the children, pulling them out of the vehicle and placing them safely behind the patrol cars. The girls clung to the officers' uniforms like shipwrecked people in a storm. The driver, in a last act of desperation, tried to exit through the driver's side door, but was knocked to the ground with a precise blow. The metallic clang of handcuffs echoed once more, sealing the man's fate. However, the danger wasn't over yet. As the girls were rushed into the school, Michael noticed something that made his heart race again. On the passenger seat, still visible, was a second sheet of paper, different from the list of names. It was a map of the area with points marked in red, as if the school weren't the only target. He tugged on the nearest officer's arm, trying to warn him. The officer quickly glanced inside the van and grabbed the document, his face turning serious in seconds. This revelation showed that the driver wasn't an isolated criminal. There was something bigger going on, something that might just be beginning. Michael didn't understand all the details, but he knew his intuition was right. The rescue, however victorious it seemed, was only part of the truth. The school was safe, the girls were alive, but the shadow of a larger net loomed over everyone. Still, at that moment, the focus was on liberation. Helicopters hovered overhead, journalists began to gather behind the police barrier, and parents ran desperately to hug their children. The morning's chaos turned to relief, but also to collective shock. Michael stood still, watching the scene with silent tears. He had risked everything, had faced discredit, fear, and even persecution. And now, before him, he saw proof that his courage had saved 7 lives. But deep down, he knew something was still missing. There were unanswered questions, a heavy silence in the air that wouldn't easily disappear. Because when such a dark secret is exposed, there are almost always more hidden layers waiting to be uncovered. The square in front of the school was filled with the sound of sirens, camera flashes, and the murmurs of the crowd. Parents rushed to hug their rescued daughters, teachers tried to reorganize the students, and reporters jostled for space, seeking statements. Amidst all the confusion, Michael remained standing, dwarfed by the immensity of the scene, as if he hadn't yet fully grasped what he had done. People moved in every direction, yet he stood still, not out of orgullo but de perplexidade, a quiet disbelief that something he had said algo tão simples had triggered such a massive chain of consequences. It was then that the principal, the same one who had earlier ignored him with a condescending smile, approached with tears in her eyes. She grabbed the boy's shoulders, and for the first time, seriousness filled her expression. "Michael, I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. And if it weren't for your courage, we would be mourning a tragedy today." He just lowered his eyes, unsure how to respond. The apology rang true, but it didn't erase the weight of the rejection. He'd felt hours earlier. Still, there was a quiet comfort in knowing that finally someone saw more than a distracted boy in him. There was something healing in that moment, yet incomplete, as if part of him still didn't fully trust the sudden change in how the world now looked at him. The police officers also approached. One of them, the same one who had watched the video, removed his hat as a sign of respect. "You were braver than most adults would be, kid. You saved lives today." Michael felt his chest warm at those words, but he remained humble. He didn't smile, he didn't boast. He just murmured, "I just wish someone had listened to me sooner." The silence that followed that sentence was more eloquent than any speech. Reporters took notes. Teachers glanced at each other, and even the police officers seemed to reflect on the power of his words. It was a silence filled with guilt, recognition, and a collective awakening. The painful awareness that children see more than we allow ourselves to admit. The boy no one took seriously had become the hero who changed the destiny of an entire city. But even as he received the first signs of recognition, Michael still felt the story wasn't over. There was a shadow looming over that map found in the van, a silent promise that this case could be just the beginning of something much bigger. Later that night, as he sat alone near the window of his bedroom, staring at the distant skyline bathed in orange from the city lights, he wondered if that shadow would return. A dot circled in red on the map, a location no one had yet questioned, stayed in his mind like a whisper refusing to fade. And in his young heart, one thing became clear. Listening had saved lives today, but what wasn't heard might be what truly puts them all in danger tomorrow. Night fell over Atlanta like a heavy blanket, muffling all sounds and leaving the city in an uncanny silence. In the small apartment in Decatur, Michael sat by the window, his face illuminated only by the dim light of a street lamp. His mother had arrived earlier that day, hugging him tightly when she learned everything, but now he preferred to be alone, staring outside, as if searching for answers that had not yet been given. Outside, the activity seemed normal. Cars passing by, neighbors returning home, children playing on the sidewalk, unaware that hours earlier, a tragedy had almost occurred just blocks away. To Michael, nothing seemed normal. The weight of what he had seen, what he had experienced, lingered on his skin, as if every detail still echoed in his memory. He remembered the driver's eyes, cold and calculating, the list of innocent girls' names, and the map dotted with red. That memory burned inside him, like a flame that couldn't be extinguished. He knew the city celebrated the man's arrest. The press called him a hero, and teachers now regarded him with respect. But for him, all of this was only part of the truth. He felt there was much more, hidden, waiting to emerge when no one was paying attention. The boy took a deep breath and leaned his forehead against the window. He didn't want to be seen as a hero. He never sought recognition or applause. What he wanted was simple, for people to have believed in him from the start. Perhaps then the burden wouldn't have been his alone. But deep down, he understood that some battles can only be fought in silence, and that sometimes solitude is the price of courage. A police car drove slowly down the street, its lights flashing blue and red. Michael looked up, watching the reflection dance on the bedroom walls. It was just a routine patrol, but that detail triggered a new alarm in his mind. What if the driver wasn't the only one? What if the map was proof of other plans, other vans, other names? The silence in the room was broken only by the distant sound of a siren. Michael didn't look away. He stood there, motionless, absorbing every sound, every signal, as if ready to notice the next detail that everyone else would miss. Because deep down he knew his story didn't end there. He was just a boy, but a boy who had changed the fate of 7 lives. And perhaps, somewhere, he was about to change the fate of many more. If you felt the impact of this story and believe it needs to be told to more people, subscribe to the channel now. Here you'll always find thrilling and suspenseful accounts, stories that keep you hooked until the very last second. Your subscription is the fuel we need to continue revealing narratives as intense as this one.